One is the governance and risk area. And we're going to go through these in some more detail, so we'll expand what each of these mean. The infrastructure and networking, and the application and information integrity level. So some of the BA focal points, and this is a concept that is most important. This whole body of work we've developed, which is available online and around the end of the year, and then we'll, is that right, Colleen? Am I saying the right thing? Yeah. And we'll then put up training modules online with our partner company with IIIE. Alan's representing IIIE here today. So this is a joint venture, and we had contributors from Intel Corporation and MIT and a number of other enterprises that helped us with this. So it's about understanding not only the value in getting a BA involved, but how do we really arm the BA community to build in security from the requirements on. So you heard me mention this in the opening statement. So many cybersecurity mentions are under the non-functional requirements and tend to be overly simplified to the system needs to be secure. Right, so we need to break that mindset, and what does that really mean? And it's very situational. So we hope we're giving you tools. We've developed, when we count the modules, I think it's 66 learning modules we've created that average 20 to 30 minutes each. And the people behind me here are the contributors to build that and a couple others. So governance and risk is about understanding the enterprise environment. What's the risk profile, the risk appetite, and understanding this for the BA is important because it gives context for everything else. So a relatively small number of BAs that we found today are working at the enterprise level, but we'd expect that to grow over time as more and more companies are trying to step up the enterprise framework. And it's this is also a team sport, right? It's about integrating the business, the architects, the security specialists, and enabling a security framework to be effective given the risk profile and operations of the company. In the area of infrastructure and networking, this is key in every enterprise, and it's about how do you manage the infrastructure and the network for all the key security concerns. What we're trying to do in a learning sense is not go into the technical detail of that, but help the business make good decisions around what is the right amount of control that's desired. So some assets may be so critical they need to be firewalled off or subnets built. We want to explain what those terms are and what the appropriate use cases of employing those techniques would be, so you can have a reasonable discussion with the real security experts in the company to come up with what's the right business answer for that deployment. And then the last area is absolutely critical, and this is around the application and information integrity level. It's about the data and securing data, and it's about applications. So here the key concept is we want to make applications work from the ground up, have those requirements constructed to meet the business need just enough. Because one of the questions we had in a prior session is, you could spend a whole lot of money on cybersecurity, probably more than the organization would ever want to spend, and still not have a perfect security system. So how do you make the right investment decisions? And clearly that's something the BAs need to get involved in from a benefit structure for sure, and help and assist with the cost structure design of what that next incremental security improvement would be. So from the enterprise level perspective, now you get to see a little bit of the what I was talking about here. This is the list of the topics that we put in under the enterprise level. So what I want to do is ask the panel a little bit about what do you see in your regular practice around governance and policy going on? Any one of you want to jump on that one first?
I'll go.
All right, Terry.
From a BA perspective, Corporations, businesses really of any size, including nonprofits, all have to establish some governance around their cybersecurity policy and stance, and then identify who the owners are for those different domains. Business analysis can actually enable the business to perform some assessments, evaluations, and recommendations, depending on the size of the business, the vertical of that business, its relationship with its business partners, and at that governance level, working to make sure that it integrates with their overall vision, their mission, and their goals.
Sounds good. Binder, what do you think about this number 9 here about the business case? We were asked before about managing that cost. Any comments on how do you build a business case for cybersecurity?
I think I'm just going to reiterate what we discussed earlier as well. So it's all about identifying the risk. It all starts from that. So from risk analysis, when we identify what are the impacts, so making that conscious decision to either kind of accept it or deal with it and budget it. So I think business analysts should have that security perspective to when they are budgeting. And accordingly, based on various factors, what exactly the organization is trying to secure, and we build the budget around it. And at the same time, also when we are building the business case, give the different options of what is that we are losing, whether it's the information or it is the organization brand, is again something to be considered, and bring all of those things into the business case so that the organization or the leaders can make an informed decision on what it is.
Very good, thanks. So at the infrastructure and technical level, this is the basic information that we're covering in there. It's about securing the layers that are in the infrastructure, network security, platforms and servers. You can see the list. I think the one that's quite topical these days is cloud and what happens in the cloud around security. And the basic answer to that, Alan, what's up with cloud?
So I think cloud really kind of blurs a lot of the traditional boundaries. We're used to doing defense in depth in cybersecurity, where you put a moat around the castle and you build a lot of physical barriers and other types of virtual barriers to the data. I think with cloud security, things like encryption of the data at rest and careful access control policies and two-factor authentication and all those kinds of things become much, much more important.
Thank you. Kevin, anything to add to that?
I think it's really important to note that although the cloud is a great option for companies that want to scale and might not have their own resources, keep in mind that it really is up to your company, your organization, to perform due diligence to understand that your cloud partner is really aligned with your needs. And so in terms of your own risk tolerance or risk aversion, you would need to be very clear with the provider you're working with and be very clear in what's managed through the contract of what's covered and what isn't covered. Just because you have a provider doesn't mean necessarily you're off the hook. So that's just maybe another tip to keep in mind when it comes to cloud, that you still need to be diligent and make sure you have your own governance policies, controls, perform your own testing as well to make sure that you're satisfied with your level of coverage.
By the way, I didn't introduce all of you, so Kevin, you want to introduce yourself in a couple of sentences about what you do when you're not at a conference?
Very briefly, I like to talk. I'm the president of the IIBA Winnipeg chapter. I've been a member of the IIBA for a long time, CBAP. I'm passionate about technology. I work for online business systems. We have two pillars, digital transformation and risk, security, and privacy. So I'm very passionate about infusing security in everything we do. And I'm fortunate to be in a company that really appreciates and embraces that.
Alan?
So I'm Alan Parrish. I'm here representing the IEEE Computer Society as a partner on this project. I guess my connection to cybersecurity, unlike the rest of these folks, is a little more distant. I did a few years ago serve as the first chair of the cyber operations program at the U.S. Naval Academy, and have since gone to Mississippi State as the associate vice president for research. So I don't live this quite on an everyday basis, but I certainly appreciate the challenges that all of you face.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for being here. Terry?
I'm Terry Baresh. I'm a certified business analyst professional, member of the IIBA. I've been working as a business analyst in security and cybersecurity for many years. I'm currently working as a consultant for a large financial firm in Minnesota to stand up their cybersecurity program, which I've done on a couple of other occasions in the past. It's an honor to be asked to work on this project. I am extremely excited to promote cybersecurity awareness and training. The world is going to need a lot of business analysts for this going forward. There's no way that business and IT can solve this problem alone.
Bindu?
Hi, Bindu Chanavirappa. I'm from the UK and again certified business analysis professional. I'm also the director at the IIBA UK chapter for London communities. And yes, I think security was something which I had to recognize as a business analyst. I myself wasn't doing, and even the whole organization didn't see it the way it had to be seen. And that is when my journey into the security, or specifically cybersecurity, started. And I think since then, as a business analyst, we just cannot focus on value additions and not seeing the security aspect to it. So we have that responsibility as BAs. We are the trusted advisors for organizations, and we have to holistically cover, which includes security as well. And when I recognize this from my own personal experience, I've been kind of trying to promote this awareness that security is not outside. It has to be inclusive of no matter what role we are doing, whether we are at the first line talking to the customers or at the top level at the management or anywhere in between. And yes, when I knew that IIBA was coming up with this initiative, it was really added power to the message what I was giving. And since then, I've been part of this program, and again, a passionate team, really honored to be here, and
Thanks,
is what
Bindu.
it is.
So this is another part of the content we have. Talk about data and data at rest, data in transit, directory management, authentication and access controls, privilege account management, and user and security awareness. Again, these are things that are all described in the context of business analysis. Solution delivery is another one of these. And so you can see the topics there. They're around application, database, and web level security. And then operations security considerations in terms of incident response, security operations center, forensics and continuous improvement. So we end up with a module called future proofing that talks about where this is all going into the future. Kevin, you wrote that module. You want to talk a little bit about what that's about?
So it's really critical that we understand that this is an evolving process, right? We may be secure today, that doesn't mean we're going to be secure tomorrow. So in terms of making sure that we're prepared and that we're evolving at the same pace as the threats around us, it's really critical that we manage and we build a process where we continually reevaluate where we are, that we're using and leveraging latest technologies, that we're embracing things like the cloud, but we're also sensitive to the potential risks, understanding, performing risk assessments and understanding, impact assessments. We need to be really diligent. And so I think in terms of being able to future-proof, it's being proactive, it's being prepared, it's knowing the things that are important to your organization, and then being prepared to deal with those incidents.
Thanks, Kevin. So our general approach here was, all of the things you just saw, we kind of clumped them together a little bit. There are 66 what will become learning modules. So first we constructed a PowerPoint framework for each of the 66 topics. It always starts with what are the key terms, and then the next thing is how does any of this apply to the BA? So every one of these 66 modules follows this format that starts with how does this topic apply to a BA? So the challenge was hitting the sweet spot between too little and too much technical information. So we wanted to arm BAs with enough that they can really be engaged in a conversation with a security professional, and smart enough to figure out how to translate that to the business people so they can make informed and correct decisions. So then we go into use cases where it applies, what are the related risks, what are the technology controls that are possible, what are the process controls that are possible, and then making sure you understand those key learnings and the important concepts that are business-oriented. So what this is about is really about, that we have a real concern for the demand that's coming in cybersecurity. I mean, you read weekly in the newspaper about different companies that have had breaches. And some of them are, happening in very unusual ways, like Target actually had their point of sale hacked through the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, right? So that's kind of an odd path, but it says that it's a very blurred line between what's an internal and what's an external hack. So lots of things need to be changing there about the way we think. BAs have an obligation, and I mean that sincerely, a real obligation to make cybersecurity better. If we don't do it, who does? So typically we've taken a position around protect the perimeter, some other considerations from the database people, but are we building it into our applications infrastructure? In general, we have not done that. It's time for us to step up. We want to give you the tools to understand what's required to do that, but ask you to go out. This is a specialty in one sense, and another, it's table stakes, right? This is absolutely as much an important knowledge area as elicitation techniques. So this is essential to building quality applications, quality business solutions into the future. We partnered, as we mentioned, with IIIE to deliver this. It'll have the 66 modules that'll be platformed on IIIE's learning management system. And then it'll be available as a bundle that includes a book that is primarily just a printout of the, if this is just a sample of like 3 modules. So the final version will be about 400 printed pages, and it'll be out roughly the end of the year available. The learning modules online at IIIE will be available roughly the same time frame, and then we'll have a certification exam that applies to both IIIE and IIBA available. The whole thing is co-branded, so it'll all be out. Probably the middle of February is a realistic expectation, but we wanted to have a gap to make sure you had all the learning materials before you sit for the exam. The way we'd expect this to work in the practice world is chapters, training companies. The real need here is after the training's delivered is to really get involved in mentoring, coaching, to make sure this all comes to reality. So it creates, for those of you who have some experience in this, certainly it would hope that you would share your experience and help companies come up to speed. I personally think this is something that every BA needs in every company, in government, in nonprofits. It's so important that we make this long-term improvement. I mean, we've seen even in U.S. national politics where major government entities have been hacked. Everything from the State Department, where most of the passport IDs were stolen by a foreign entity, through accusations of voter fraud. So some of that is probably completely true, others may be exaggerated stories, but the point is huge impact. So I want to do this now. I want to, rather than drain the rest of this, I would like to ask the audience here for you to ask your own questions, and we'll get the panel to respond. We have about a little more than 15 minutes left, so we can turn this more into a discussion type session. Anyone have a question? Yes, sir. Fair enough. Yeah.
So, I appreciate the topic. There's not the worst feeling as a BA when bringing in those to a project. They say this environment is unacceptable. So, that's a horror story. But I want to ask about identity governance and provisioning. Thank you. So an accountant joins the firm, and on day one, they get access to all these different tools and applications and everything. I think a lot of firms are still in the process of getting to a provisioning world, I think. I think it's very manual, and, we'll figure it out when they get there on day one. Have you guys have any experience with, and I think a BA plays a big part in that, defining those rules. So what I'm looking for is like best practices on understanding the different roles and how to go about finding what a new employee should gain access to on day one to make everyone's lives a bit simpler.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So I can speak from experience, both from what I would like to consider best practice and from some of the horror stories that I've seen too. I think what's really critical from an identity and access management point of view is that we really understand roles and role-based security. So I think as an analyst, we really should understand which applications, which roles should be allowed to be used by which users. And so through, let's say Active Directory and setting proper security levels, when someone joins a company, they shouldn't be given all the keys to the kingdom, right? You should be earning them. And in most cases, there would be an onboarding or a training program that would enable you to have the right access at the right time. And as a business analyst, we should really be looking at the principle of least privilege, right? What's the minimum amount that you need, which should also be the maximum amount that you need, right? If we get that right, then you shouldn't be liable for accessing or using something in a way that you didn't know shouldn't be used that way or accessed that way. And typically, when you're onboarding, that's the time where you would walk through a policy manual and say, these are the expectations as an employee and in your role of the things that you would be expected, if you've got devices that are corporate property, how you can use those devices. If you're using any personal devices, what are the policies and guidelines around that? And so as a business analyst, we should be defining those rules that are in accordance with enterprise governance and making sure that the right amount of access is given. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add or...
Just one thing I would like to add to that is probably a prerequisite would be to understand what is our information saying and try to segregate what is that critical information and then the information that can be shared. So what is the story that our information is telling? So once we understand that information, then how we segregate the roles, we will be able to segregate. So exactly, as a prerequisite, probably we might have to do that exercise and then have that policy in place, if that makes sense.
Okay, any other questions?
Hopefully that answered your question. Okay.
Sir?
Absolutely, thank you. So I'm a project manager for our infrastructure team, under which our security team falls. And recently we had a debate, and I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on it. I believe it was NIST said that it is more dangerous to have users change passwords every 90 days than it is to have users create one super difficult password, and that's just their forever password. Any thoughts or comments?
From a password management perspective, I think the NIST has been back and forth on this, as several others have. What's the problem with changing a password every 90 days? A hacker will tell you that they would prefer that you do, because your user's just going to add a number at the end. So if I can find that user's password somewhere on the dark web, it's not long before I will own that account. So that's part of the reason or the use case behind the premise that changing your password every 90 days probably isn't the best policy. Complex passwords are probably much better. I would take it a step further and say that companies, corporations, and individuals should have password management capabilities. I have a password management tool that I use, I share with my family. I'm working with our company right now to establish password management capabilities and services. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think there are very good tools out there that can manage very complex passwords and have their own protocols in terms of how often they would need to be changed or managed, and having one password.
Right.
Not saying a tool.
And I think it also matters on what it is you're trying to protect, right?
Yeah.
At the nuclear facilities, critical infrastructure has very different criteria around that password. So that gets back to your policy and your standards. But there again, you have to provide the capability to support the types of changes and standards or practices that are put in place.
And I think in addition to that, having multi-factor seems to be the trend that most people are going to. So if you're using an Office 365 or most tools out there, multi-factor, at least two-factor is becoming the standard. So
That's right.
Having a device or biometric or something else that someone won't easily have access to seems to be more the way we're going, as opposed to complexity of passwords or how often you change your password. I'd say that's becoming more the standard.
And you can see there's opportunities for business analysis in every one of these processes.
As
What's the
long-
right level?
Yeah.
Exactly.
As long as they don't write that complex password on a Post-it note and put it up there, because it is complex.
Not on Post-its.
Yeah.
The stories I could tell.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you. My question is really for the BAs and how you interact with the security professionals in your organization. I'm asking that because we did go through a situation where we were working out certain scenarios, what might happen, what kind of people breaking into the system, and what would happen as a result. The usual answer I got from the security folks is to say, well, we've got it covered, don't worry about it, it can't happen, and, well,
Famous
I
last
really
words.
didn't have that much power over them, and I have to take them at their word. Now, and I didn't want to take an adversarial approach, but how do you engage them without sort of threatening their power or their know-how, and how can you best build a relationship with them?
I could start and I
I
could
know.
go on for 20 hours. That's a fantastic question. Security response teams, your CERTs, typically do want to own their playbooks, their runbooks, and that's really important. But let's keep in mind that they are protecting business assets. They don't own the assets, and they don't own the recovery of those assets. So in a sense, they need to understand what their role is in identifying an incident or an event, a threat, and then who do they call is part of that question. And the business analyst can play a significant role in helping them understand what the processes are, what the criticality is, what's the impact, and then whatever your response plan is. The business analyst can play a significant role in developing that business response plan with the rest of your organization.
I would probably add, and this is maybe just a tip in terms of building relationships, I actually work really close with some, very diligent, black and white, well-trained security professionals, and I come from the business BA side of things, so I can completely understand where you're coming from. But in terms of building relationships, one of the things that we do is we actually meet on a monthly basis, and so we do have a team, and we actually make it a fun event. And so we get out actually to like a local bar, and we get together and we just chat about things. And so I found that that's a really good way in terms of building the relationship and the trust. And really it's a sharing of knowledge. So, I mean, if you can get to that stage where you have that trust and respect, and to your point, the business owns the assets, and the security professionals are very good at what they do, right? And so they believe that they know all the rules and how they're going to do it. But if you can have that conversation or think about a scenario or maybe something new is coming that they don't know about, that's where you have a good sharing. If you've got that right level of trust, you can have really good discussion.
Agreed.
Just to add one more perspective to that is, yes, at the individual level, relationship does matter at all stages, but if we can get the whole organization to see that no matter what they are doing, if they work within the security policy which states what is that we are securing, that would have a lot more impact if the whole entire organization works in that way. And that's a shift, it's a bigger shift, which probably we will all have to work towards it at some point. But that is where we should be looking at. And yes, definitely having those relationships and conversations and making sure that they are involved in whatever we are doing. I think that awareness would bring that shift.
Over there, yep.
Yeah, okay, good. So this is similar to the other question. Sorry, I'm going in and out. When we were talking about the material that's coming forth next year, I missed part of it, and I apologize if it's a repeat, but so that material for each of the different topic areas, whether it's operation, technology, controls, whatever, you say it all ties back to the BA and practical aspects. So are there requirement recommendations for each type of area included in that material? And then to tie back to the previous question, as you fight to include those requirements on your projects, there's a logistical aspect of ownership, of course. You don't need to worry about that, whatever. But as you succeed in adding those requirements, there's going to be a budgetary impact to that to increase the hours. Hey, I need someone from this group, SecOps, TechOps, whatever. How do you wage that internal budget struggle when that group is saying, we got it? Because the business is, in our world, is going to be trying to reduce the cost of that effort, right? Does that make sense?
So let me make a prediction here. Cybersecurity is going to change the way that businesses do their business. Cybersecurity is now the cost of doing business. Historically, IT has asked for money for projects that do something. Cybersecurity is going to have to take a different approach. There aren't enough people in the world to do cybersecurity jobs. We know that. The capabilities of our adversaries and their funding is much better than your organization, and I don't care what organization you represent. We already know those things. My prediction is that as business looks at what the requirements are, what are your customer expectations? What are your competitors doing? Those are requirements now. What are your regulatory mandates? Those are requirements that the business will have to take into consideration. Funding projects the way that they have, funding programs the way they have, is no longer going to be effective. They're not going to be able to manage this way. they're going to have to fund capabilities. They're going to provide services. Cybersecurity has become a service-oriented industry. They're going to have services that are available, and then there are processes in order to provide those services for the initiative or for the organizations within the business units. When we look at that, when we look at capabilities in a service contract or a service catalog, business analysis can help enable all of that. Now, as your program, you're going to look for funding, you're going to have to look for funding for a capability. I'm looking out, I need to be able to provide these capabilities for my customer. I'm in annuities, I need to attract more customers, I'm going to use this data set. I'm not going to look for funding a particular project now. I'm not going to look for a tool or a thing. So that's what cybersecurity, in my prediction, is going to start driving. The requirements are going to be at a capability level. And then from there down, agile is really going to be the best approach. That waterfall takes way too long. Your cyber space is going to be attacked. So this is my prediction. That model will change.
All right, we're at near the end time. I might have one more question we can take. Anyone? I don't see any hands out there in the sea. All right, well, thank you all very much for your time here at the end of the second day of the conference. And I hope you picked up something. And I'd really encourage you, once all of our capability comes online, check it out. There's information out there already in the form of this shortened version that you can take a peek at our booth to get a sense of what they look like. But they'll be more like a YouTube quality rather than a LinkedIn learning quality, if you can follow, that mental model. So, and it's meant to really give you the capabilities to understand all those topic areas. So I'd encourage you to look, and I'd encourage you to really make it part of your BA practice. So again, thank you so much for attending.